You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida.
Stand by.
We're going live.
Worldwide. This is the Jamie Havican Show with your host, Jamie Havican.
Hello guys, and welcome to tonight's show. Thank you for joining us. We just finished listening to Task Force Griffin with Commander Cobra, another great show and a great addition to KGRA. I'd like to welcome my co-host Bill to the show. How you doing, Bill?
Good evening, Jamie, and hello to all the listeners and everyone in the KGRAradio.com chat room. So what's going on?
You tell me. You're the one that's been doing some sky watching. Have you seen anything?
Actually, we did. We did one a few nights ago. And Al of the Bronxville Paranormal Society was with us, and he told me, Bill, they're doing an air show because we seen something that looked really odd, Jamie. It looked like an AWACS went over my house really low. And we did see a few days before that what looked like a helicopter, and I went outside. There was no sound. I think it was a black helicopter. And then another friend of ours, Brian from the Bronxville Paranormal Society, is having sightings of black vans outside his house. And
wow.
A friend of mine, Keith, who does unbelievable. These guys, Jamie, they do great work on YouTube. Space Imaging Keith. His friend Paul has all these telescopes down in Florida, and they do lunar observations and planetary observations, and he had a black van following him for a few days. So it's just one of those things that's going on right now between us and on the YouTube sky watching. We're having some crazy activity going on. I don't know, it's all coincidence, but it brought up a really interesting conversation. So it's just something that we all found a little bit odd, to say the least.
I would say so. I had a strange dream. That's about all I can say, is that I seen a UFO, and I was trying to tell somebody. But what's strange is, in the dream, I knew exactly where it was in my town and what time to be there to see it. So I'm like, should I actually go there and check it out or not?
You know what? I had a crazy dream last night. I spoke to Eric a little bit Eric is a MUFON field investigator in Boston, Massachusetts. But Jamie, I had a vivid dream last night, really lucid, about a structure being built into the sky, into space. And in the dream, I was told it would take over 200 years to build. All the countries of the world would have to come together. And I seen a spacecraft flying from this thing into deep space. I was like, whoa, this is heavy. This is just too heavy for me. Yeah. I never had a dream like that. And then I seen these little black cubes that were going around and building. They were engineering things. And I was like, what is this kind of dream? Where did this come from? So, yeah, I had a very odd kind of a dream myself. But, Jamie, before we get to our guest, M.A. Carrano, we have a trivia question. If you want to ask it, go for it.
Yeah, let me pull it up here. Now, you guys are going to be answering this to win a set of bumper stickers. When is the next meteor shower, and what is the cause of the activity? So again, what is the next meteor shower, and what is the cause of the activity? The first person to answer it correctly in the chat room will win a complete set of bumper stickers.
Yes.
KGRA bumper stickers, the Jamie Havican Show bumper stickers, Bill's YouTube Skywatcher bumper stickers. Is that it? Is there another one?
That's it.
Yep. So first person in chat, when is the next meteor shower, and what is the cause of the activity?
There you go.
All right, well, tonight's guest is a returning guest. I'm going to let him talk about his background. We had him on, I believe, about a year ago, and as for me being personal and being, I guess, just being honest, the caliber of intellect is above me a bit, but great information. So I'd like to welcome back to the show M.A. Carrano. We're calling him Mike tonight. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, what's going on, guys? How are you?
We're doing good. Now, why don't you fill in the people, you could do it better than I can, about some of your background and what gets you qualified to talk about the topics we will tonight.
Okay, I'm an experimental philosopher and I'm a systems consultant. I'm living and working out of the greater Yale, New Haven area of Connecticut. I've launched a consulting agency. I'm the senior intelligence vice president of it. It's called Avatar Paradigms, and what we essentially specialize in is bringing the message of holism and synergy and conscious evolution. And that's what we apply to corporate boardrooms. We apply it in public symposiums, etc.
All right.
Okay, did I just hear everybody just glazed over? I'm like, wait a minute, hold on, I can hear the crickets.
Well, I'm trying to see if people in chat got the question right at the same time. But yeah,
I'm talking about Mach 26, so I'm going to have to go ahead and shave it down a little bit.
But now, how does that, like Jamie asks, how does that specifically tie into, let's just say, for what we're really going to be speaking about tonight is ufology?
Okay. So one of the things which I did is, because I'm coming from an unconventional background, is I decided to apply a system or a methodology of philosophy towards tackling some of the largest conundrums that are currently plaguing us in the 21st century, at least philosophical conundrums. And I like to tackle paradoxes or what things people consider to be unsolvable as a means of proving the efficacy of my philosophical method. So one is the existence of God. I've tackled that several times. Other things are the existence of whether or not moral phenomena can be proven to objectively exist or not. In this particular case, I like to apply metanoetics to the world of ufology because it's so elegantly applicable in terms of rendering the unknown known, at least in this particular case, that it almost becomes effortless in the sense of clarifying what's taking place in the field of ufology.
Now, how did your interest in ufology begin?
Sorry, I'm laughing.
No,
right, go ahead.
We're all listening. How did your interest in ufology begin? Can you give us an update on what we discussed on the previous show as well?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was a kid, my mother was always growing up, and my mother was always talking when I was growing up about something called the Hudson Valley sighting that she saw many, many, many moons ago, and I thought that was fascinating. But one time when I was in school, my fourth grade teacher mentioned that she herself had also witnessed it, and that gave it an air of credibility. So I began investigating a little bit when I was a kid, and then as I got older, the question basically took on a little bit more philosophical significance, and then I immersed myself in doing a lot of reading, and then material just basically became unearthed as I progressed down the path of that, and some of it just became you just couldn't ignore the content, and if you did ignore the content, it was to your peril. So that's how I ended up pretty much where I am right now, at least on the subject.
Wait, now I'm in the Hudson Valley in New York.
Sure.
I want to hear more about this Hudson Valley experience because I want to know if I'm familiar with it, or if I am not, I want to know more about it.
You know, I have information prepared for that. So if that's something you want to touch upon, I'm ready for that. But there's certain background knowledge that I need to sort of get people caught up to speed with in order so they could understand the method that I'm using to apply to the problem. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. You might remember the last time that we conversed that I discussed something called Metanoetics. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I still think, like I said, it might be helpful to give your listeners a crash course in Metanoetics, and that way they can sort of apply everything I'm talking about in their own experience to understand what it is. And the concept of Metanoetics actually begins with the phrase meta, which is Greek for beyond, and nous, which means knowledge. And the term itself wasn't coined by me. It actually comes from a guy named Hajime Tanabe. He was a Japanese philosopher. He's the first person to coin it. And he used the term to denote what he at least believed to be insights whose nature transcended the limits of rationality. So when I decided to call my philosophy Metanoetics, I wasn't aware that Tanabe had already beat me to it. And I thought that I really invented the term, but an old friend of mine who's actually another philosopher, he ran it by me, and he just basically told me that I needed to check out Tanabe's work, which is pretty much exactly what I did. And when I was looking at it, it's safe to say that the similarities between his thinking and mine staggering. They're just staggering. And since that moment, I've kind of decided to continue to work with the understanding that Tanabe's Metanoetics was really something that he was applying to philosophies that would transcend the limits of rationality, and that mine would fall into that. So I kind of credited him as naming my philosophy posthumously. But today, like I said, I don't think it's just purely a coincidence between our work. I think it's more along the lines of a case of really synchronicity. And how the idea of Metanoetics first occurred to me is that it was around the time that I was wrapping up my first book. It's called Asleep in the Helix, Survival and the Science of Self-Realization. And it was during that time that I was really involved in a really intense meditation session, and the entire philosophy just occurred to me in a stroke of insight. And sometimes I like to joke by equating the knowledge as being transmitted to me in a kind of Gnostic state of mystical theosis, or an aeon receiving pneumatic wisdom from the pleroma. That's something Gnostics would really recognize. And other times I like to parallel it to maybe receiving something like a Jewish Merkabalim, which would be Ein Sof knowledge, or knowledge from beyond the limits of the temporal.
Is this part of like a meditative state that you're getting?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's where it occurred to me. That's where it occurred to me. As a matter of fact, Indian rishis, they call it Satchidananda, and they basically describe it as the merging of Atman and Brahman. It also comes it also calls into question things like the Akasha. But really, all jokes aside, the reality is that something like that happened to me, and I'm patently convinced that was the case. That's how metanoetics occurred to me. And once the philosophy was given to me, really all that was left was for me to find the language to express the idea. And what distinguishes the idea from other philosophies is pretty simple, because most philosophers attempt to build a philosophical system starting with metaphysics. They take that as their foundation, and then they stack up an epistemology on top of that, which is a theory of knowledge, and then they move from their epistemology into an ethics. And the problem that I've discovered with this method is that all philosophers have been trying to organize a worldview according to it, and they've always discovered that metaphysics will interpenetrate with epistemology, which will interpenetrate with ethics, and there's no way to neatly subdivide the two. You always end up with ethical assumptions in your metaphysics or metaphysical assumptions in your epistemology. And how I survive the problem is that metanoetics sort of function like an ink blot or a Rorschach. They're an epistemology when looked at from one perspective. They're in metaphysics when looked at from another perspective, and they're in ethics when looked at from the other perspective. But they're all three simultaneously. So kind of like the quantum collapse of a wave function, depending on who's looking at it and how it's being applied, it changes. So like I said, it's literally morphing, it's evolving, it's changing identities according to the context. And, other than this, it's distinguishable from other philosophies because it's not really a model of consciousness the way how a lot of epistemologies are, but it really empowers the ability of individuals to think in 4D. Some people think in 2D. Most people I know think in 2D. Others think in 3D, but metanoetics gives people the capacity to think in 4D. So if we look at guys like Ken Wilber, he's an integral philosopher. He created a paradigm which attempts to see the world in terms of four distinct apertures, which he calls subjective and objective and intersubjective and interobjective. And the problems that intersubjective and interobjectivity are, there's still types of subjectivity and objectivity. They're not fundamentally different perspectives in as much as they are different scales within the same two-dimensional framework of subjective and objective dichotomies. And that means even Ken Wilber is a two-dimensional thinker, which really shocks a lot of people when they find it out. And the reason why I say this is pretty simple. It's simply because most people are straight out familiar with subjectivity and objectivity, but virtually no one has ever heard of the adjective dimension of things, which are contextual interrelations, and how they unify subjective and objective, or even the projective dimension of things, which is basically pure potentials, which the objective and the subjective and the adjective appeal to as modifications of. And these are pretty much all perspectives which are present in my model of thinking, and it's precisely why metanoetics transcends and includes these modalities. Integral theorists don't do that. And because insofar as their view of the world is essentially a two-dimensional split between the inner and outer dimensions, metanoetics, they transcend integral thinking due to their capacity to think in 4D.
All right.
So
I don't want to I don't want to interrupt, but I just want
no, go ahead.
This is really intense, so you may want to pull the throttle back a little bit because
right.
Everybody
okay, so
is trying to...
let me just simplify it. Basically, metanoetics allow people to think in four dimensions. And when we do think in four dimensions, problems become much easier to solve. Most people think either subjectively and objectively, that's two dimensions, but I add two additional dimensions on top of that to allow people to problem solve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I want to just interject one thing. Is this also about like a lot of the mainstream scientists don't open themselves up to, they have this narrow-minded vision and they're not going to these other tangents, these other fringy areas?
No, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But what you're talking about is called scientism, which is distinct from science. And scientism is the worldview that science alone is the only approach to knowledge. Science alone has privileged access to truth. That's science in a pathological form. I am almost religiously pro-scientific, but at the same time, I am vehemently anti-scientistic. And so what? I'll give you an example. Where does the number 5 exist? I think we talked about this on your last show. Is it an object? Is it a sub? What is it? It doesn't physically exist. So what the hell is it?
The thought?
It's a relationship. It's an adjective type of thing. So if we're going to take scientism on its face, it would have to deny the very existence of its metaphysical foundations, which is the reality of numbers, which would make science itself illegitimate. So that's where metanoetics picks up. Numbers do exist, but they're adjective qualities that exist between objective things and in some instances subjective things. That's where they exist. So metanoetics adds an additional dimension in the way that we approach problems, and it works because these dimensions actually exist.
Okay,
and,
but would the use of mathematics be the best way to communicate with another civilization if it was advanced? Wouldn't it be?
There's a lot of assumptions about that. I think that they're probably going to have some concept of mathematics, but frankly, their intelligence is alien to us. It'd be exceedingly difficult to imagine how they might approach the problem. They might not even need math or numbers. Like, for example, Nikola Tesla calculated things by morphing the geometries in his own head without having to compute the numbers behind it. They might use something similar to that. It might be totally analogical thinking rather than, binary computational models. We tend to break things down into binary computational models, so how they're approaching the problem could be a little bit different. But hold on. I got to back up for a split second because sometimes I talk so fast that I got to catch up to my own train of thought.
And just so you know, those in chat, they really
that's that happens to me.
A little bit slow down so they can comprehend everything that's going on.
They're trying to absorb the knowledge. Yeah.
Now, in this particular instance, how metanoetics applies to ufology is that we would take the 4 dimensions of it, and we would map it out to the 4 different dimensions of the UFO phenomena. I named the 4 different dimensions, each one corresponding to a different stratosphere of perspective, or a stratus of perspective. So if you are looking at things from a subjective point of view, the subjective perspective corresponds with something I call an archetypal continuum. It's the field of the ideas. If you're looking at things from a holistic and an adjective point of view, that corresponds and it maps onto something called an existential matrix, which is the world of contextual interactions and how context influences the way that we interact with things. If you're looking at something from an objective perspective, that maps on to the chaotic axis of things or the chaotic abstract of things. It's what you're isolating for analysis. And if you're looking at something from a projective perspective, that maps onto the dimension of what we would call an aeonic event. In the past, they used to call it a noetic core, but my terminology is constantly evolving as the philosophy becomes more accurate. But just as reality has 4 dimensions, in our brain is really equipped with 4 perceptual dimensions for engaging with these dimensions. Like I said, our minds are similarly equipped with 4 dimensions to tackle these dynamics. And the first dimensional level of thinking I call primal, and it's basically because it's for contemplating the archetypal continuum of things. The second dimension is really called reductionistic. The third dimension, it's holistic, and the fourth dimension, it's called transcendent. So I think we have some of the background information that we need in order to start approaching the problem of ufology, and I think we could get through this friggin' gallimaufry of vomit that I'm spewing, so that I could actually get down to something that people can actually enjoy. You ready?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing about it is that if we're going to approach it, the question of whether or not extraterrestrials are visiting us is something that's already been taken, it's been taken, very, very seriously. And in this particular instance, we could turn to the work of Nikola Kardashev. You guys heard of the Kardashev scale, right?
I have not.
A little bit.
Okay. So Kardashev, he basically formulated what he believes to be 3 distinct images of the various kinds of extraterrestrials that humanity is likely to encounter or to discover in the cosmos. And he calls them civilizations type 1, 2, and 3.
Gotcha.
Super, super simple. And according to Kardashev, he said that a type 1 civilization is really any civilization which achieved a technological mastery over the available energy resources of its native planet. So in other words, we're talking nuclear energy, wind power, solar power, fossil fuel, any civilization which has achieved close to a type 1 level of sophistication has harnessed all the natural energy resources on this planet. Humanity is about a 0.7. That's how close we are. But when we get to type 1, we're probably going to be in space by then. Mm-hmm. After type 1, there's type 2. A type 2 civilization is, again, we're on the precipice of probably discovering one of these things. But basically, it's any civilization that's mastered all the energy resources it has, not only on its own native planet, but also all the resources of it, or all the energy of its local star, of its star output. So the 20th century Freeman Dyson, we all know who this guy is, but he's hypothesized a speculative technology that he believed would make this possible, and it was a theoretical megastructure that he called a Dyson sphere. And essentially, a Dyson sphere is a kind of technological shell which is structured so it entombs a star, and what it does is it captures all the energetic output of it. That's what he speculated that it would probably do. But he didn't just basically stop at saying that Dyson spheres might be possible, but he also proposed the existence of things like Dyson swarms, and Dyson swarms would orbit the star like highly sophisticated satellites, and he also proposed the existence of things like Dyson nets and Dyson shells. And even more advanced than a Type 2 civilization would be something he called a Type 3 civilization. And it's a civilization that, at this particular level, would be incredibly ancient, and relative to our perspective, it would be possessed of seemingly godlike technology. We wouldn't even be able to comprehend it. So Type 3 civilizations, they might be races so advanced that they would literally have obtained complete and total mastery over all the energy resources of their local galaxy. And that's astonishing to us. It's an astonishing level of complexity, at least. And the difference between such a civilization ourselves is, like I said, it's liable to say the difference between, I don't know, the difference between the civilizational complexity of our civilization versus a colony of ants in your backyard. And some listeners out there, they're probably tempted to dismiss these categories as impossible. And for the most part, they'd be correct, but we need to qualify what it means to call something impossible. And the best resource that I know for doing the job is to cite the work of another genius. His name is Michio Kaku. We all know who he is. He's a Japanese-American theoretical physicist, and he's also the co-creator of string theory. And according to Dr. Kaku, realities, it's just not so simple as to just say something's possible or something's impossible. And these situations need to be thought through with a little bit more rigor, because for Dr. Kaku, there's really 4 categories we can use to categorize the scientific technology. And the first he called possible. We all agree to that. Certain science and certain technologies are possible to us. But after that, things get a little bit more complex, because Kaku says there are at least 3 kinds of impossible that we know of. One is class 1 impossibilities, another is class 2 impossibilities, and the other is class 3 impossibilities. So Dr. Kaku begins by saying that something belongs to what we delineate as a class 1 impossibility if that, and I quote this, let me grab my note over here, the technologies are impossible today, but they don't violate the known laws of physics. Okay, let me put this away now. So that's what it is. If the technologies are possible today, but they don't violate the known laws of physics, that's a class 1 impossibility. So we're talking quantum processors, we're talking room temperature superconductors, 3D printing with biological organs being the product of output. These might be used to replace ones that are failing. We're talking about the power to teleport materials from one location to another. All of these things are theoretically possible, but we don't know how to do them yet with the current level of sophistication. Those would be class 1 impossibilities. After that, there would be class 2 impossibilities, and Dr. Kaku would define these technologies. Oh, I got to grab my card again. He would say that their technologies would sit at the very edge of our understanding of the physical world. So in this particular case, these are types of technologies that typify sci-fi. They're technologies that are decades that are decades away from where we are, or not even that. They're probably centuries or even millennia. But we're talking about time travel. We might be talking about superluminal speeds, and maybe even throwing open portals to higher dimensions. And one example that I could think of what technology might look like at this scale would be one night I was going to sleep and I was dreaming, and I had an idea regarding how it might be possible to shift between dimensions. And if you think about it, if you guys know anything about physics, and I love to read physics, I study physics. I'm not a physicist, but I know about it. I can talk about it. If a hypothetical machine were capable of generating like an anti-gravity pressure wave, and it just extends in all dimensions, and if we could collide the anti-gravity pressure wave with standard gravity in the first and the second and third dimensions, then when the wavefronts collide and they annihilate one another in three-dimensional space, the only place that they would have to remain for the pressure to travel would be into the fourth dimension and higher. So anything in the wake trail of that would basically get dragged into another dimension by the suction as the pressure wave propagated into a higher dimensional hyperspace, which we'd experience as gravity from nowhere sucking us into the fourth dimension. That's how interdimensional travel, at least in the way how I understand it, might be possible. But again, it's a class 2 possibility. It's a perfect example of what we're talking about. We're centuries away from it, maybe thousands of years, who knows? But that's like I said, a classic example of what I would call a class 2 impossibility. And then class 3 impossibilities, Kaku described as let me grab this notes over here again. Okay, they're technologies that violate the known laws of physics. Okay, simple enough. They're technologies that violate the known laws of physics. But what would such a class 3 impossibility resemble to us? We can't really imagine it. Really, it might look like magic. But I think I can give you an example that I thought of about a year ago that, Bill, I think this is going to shock you. I think it's going to blow your mind. I think you're going to be the guy that's going to really appreciate this. You see, according to Einstein's general theory of relativity, really nothing could exceed the speed of light, because anything that reaches the speed of light becomes light itself. Mm-hmm. Now, if you bear that in mind, and if you remember something called the law of accelerating returns, which basically states that the speed of technological sophistication doubles every 18 months, and you combine that with what the speed of light tells us about it, then what that means is that any sufficiently advanced civilization whose technology graduates to the point of advancing at a speed which is equal to or greater than the speed of light would spontaneously vanish and become a civilization that's entirely made out of light. And all of their technologies would be at that point no longer detectable to us. That might be the cosmic microwave background. The cosmic microwave background just might consist of Type 3 civilizations which have begun to advance so rapidly that they exceeded the light barrier, dispersed into a race of purely photonic beings or tachyonic beings, and that's kind of what they just might be. And for all intents and purposes, they would literally be godlike. They'd be outside of time. They'd be outside of space, just like photons. They would transcend all limits of matter, and they'd exist simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. And that would be utterly unbeholden to all the known laws of physics that we could possibly understand. But we at least have a precedent in Einsteinian relativity theory to imagine how that might be. But that's something along the lines of a type 3 impossibility. We don't know how it's possible. It's certainly foreseeable, at least in some semblance of it. But it's utterly astonishing when we imagine it. And do I have all you guys?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm following you.
Okay. Now, where in Kaku's categories of impossible things does extraterrestrial visitation belong? Simpler, but insofar as extraterrestrials may be thousands or even millions of years more advanced than us, I think it's safe to say that the likelihood of being visited by a Type 3 civilization like a sentient race of omniluminal beings would be, like I said, a Class 3 impossibility. But the likelihood of being visited by a Type 1 civilization or even a Type 2 civilization would be either a Type 1 or a Type 2 impossibility. So it becomes a little bit more, at least a little bit more plausible. But try to bear in mind that visitation from Type 1 and Type 2 civilizations are only impossible in terms of really humanity's conception of what we consider to be impossible. Because unlike a Type 3 civilization, it doesn't have to stretch the imagination to envision a race of beings several thousand years more advanced than us, or even a million years more advanced to us, and they're just traveling here just because. Especially when we stop and consider that relative to their own level of technological advancement, what we consider a Type 3 impossibility is liable for them to be a Type 2 or even a Type 1 impossibility. And what does that mean for us? Excuse me, sometimes I start to choke on my own spit when I start talking too fast. But it basically means that interstellar travel for a Type 1 or Type 2 civilization would very well not even, it would not even qualify as a Type 1 impossibility, at least for them. In fact, relative to them, it could even be routine, even if the technologies they employ boggle our imagination. So, in other words, the concept of extraterrestrial visitation is intelligible. Certainly there's challenges to consider, but these challenges aren't fundamental obstructions. The prospect itself is at least a logically coherent one, and it falls within the realms of feasibility. Any questions you guys want to stick in before I open my mouth and start talking again?
Jamie's got a question coming up.
Sure, go ahead.
To a break, but I just want to make a quick comment.
What's
that
up?
Could be what, you're the light beings, the interdimensional, all, it seems like they're all throughout the universe. I mean, sure. This could have direct or indirect connections to a lot of the religious texts.
It utterly can. For example, you guys have heard of Vimanas, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it would explain possibly the phenomena of Vimanas, which are flying machines which appear in the Vedic scriptures. That could certainly account for that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful idea. I remember when the idea hit me, and I was like, oh my God, that's a really cool thought. And I was itching to introduce that to the world, so I'm happy I finally got a chance to tell somebody. So there's at least a record of it.
Well, I think I'll hold that question until after the break, Bill, because we're right up on it. So,
and by the way, we do have a winner.
Oh, we have a winner. Who's our winner?
Sweetie Pie, and I think that's Amanda. It's the Orionids on the night of October 21st. And I'll just say the cause. She got 2/3 of it right, so she's the winner. The cause of it is Halley's Comet. That is the cause of what causes the activity of the meteor shower itself. So she's the winner. So I know her personally. I have her contact, so I'll definitely get that out there to her. So she is the winner for tonight's trivia question.
Alrighty, well, we're going to be back in just a couple of minutes with our guest of the night, M.A. Carrano, and hold tight. Give us about 3 minutes. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Jamie Havican Show right here on KGRA Radio, The Planet.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
Do you know what's in your body soap? Well, I didn't know the answer until about 5 years ago when I looked at the label of my soap and was shocked to see all the chemicals. For my entire life, I had been assaulting the largest organ of my body, my skin, and to think my children were using it too. Well, a lot has changed since then. Today, my family and I operate Stone City Farms, where we make and sell all-natural goat milk soap using fresh goat milk from goats we raise on our farm. Our mission at Stone City Farm is to produce high-quality, all-natural goat milk soap for people who want a fresh, unrefined, natural product. At Stone City Farms, we offer scented and unscented soaps and a signature line of gift sets customizable to your needs. To see what our customers are saying, go to StoneCityFarm.com. Use the code NATURAL for a 20% discount. That's StoneCityFarm.com, code NATURAL for 20% off your order. You never know what could be hiding in your soap.
The station that won't put you to sleep at work. KGRA, The Planet.
All right, welcome back to the Jamie Havican Show for our second segment of the night. Joining me is my co-host, Bill Forte, and our guest of the night is M.A. Carrano. Second appearance, and he'll be returning in November for a third appearance on the show. Now, coming back from the break, I have a question. Where do you think E.T. Civilizations originate from? Are they from known universes, interdimensional, or even from the future?
Frankly, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Which one do you think would be more plausible if you had to take a stab?
I have my suspicions about the phenomena of interdimensions. I think that theoretically it seems to be plausible, but it doesn't gel with my experience. The way how I imagine interdimensionality to exist would require an ether theory. Ether theory would be basically that space is not a vacuum; it would be a plenum. And it would be folded up at a very small level that opens up into other realms if you could just sort of slip through the quantum crevices of it into other places. But it would be a lot more likely that what we're dealing with would be something from a local star system, maybe a Proxima Centauri. There's a lot of news which is coming forth that there might be a habitable planet around Proxima Centauri. It's certainly within the habitable zone. So I don't like to speculate in terms of too exotic principles. I like to keep everything at least within the realms of science and philosophy so that we could reason about it, at least abstractly.
Well, Mike, I got a question. Is it
Sure,
maybe a little bit naive to think that when we talk about planets in the habitable zone, in the Goldilocks zone, it might be a little bit naive to think that it's going to be carbon-based life form, and it cannot be of some other type of creative process.
No, you're utterly right. It wouldn't be so much naive, because naive has a different meaning than I think that what we're applying here. Naive means that if something meets the sense as we believe it at the face value. In this particular instance, it would just basically be a little bit anthropocentric for us to assume that it's going to be carbon-based life, because we're carbon-based life, and that's everything that we know of. We could be dealing with something along the lines of silicates. Silicates could be silicone-based life. I think it's a lot more likely if something's going to discover us, it's going to be silicone-based, and it might not even be an organic being. It's probably going to be some sort of radically sophisticated silicone-based life form with quantum processing technology, and it's not going to have wetware the way that we do.
Interesting. So going back to what you were discussing before the break,
Sure.
You can continue on that so we can...
Okay, so we're good?
Yes, go for it.
So, just with that out of the way, we can basically move on to evaluating, at least in my opinion, how powerful the ET visitation hypothesis is for at least providing rational explanations for what are really a wide variety of strange and anomalous events that occur pretty much worldwide. And to do this, it's really as simple as shifting our point of view from the subjective perspective, which is what we were just dealing with, and we move to an adjective perspective. And this is where the existential matrix of contextualized inventor, it really becomes observable. And this is where we abandon what I called earlier a primal mode of one-dimensional cognition, and then we adopt a holistic mode of three-dimensional cognition, which is pretty much fit for evaluating circumstances around which UFO phenomena is contextualized. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So as you probably remember, we talked about it in our last interview. I cited how Stephen Hawking said that he thought that the universe was, or at least life in the universe from a statistical point of view, made total sense to him from a mathematical vantage. And he said, let me get the quote over here. He said, "To my mathematical brain, the numbers alone make thinking about aliens perfectly rational." So I agree with him. I agree with the guy. And I've looked at the research, and I've looked at physicists like Itzhak Bars and John Turing, and what they've discovered is that what we call the observable universe has a diameter that would blow your minds. It's 93 billion light years. It's gigantic. And beyond that, there's another astrophysicist. His name is Mario Livio, and he's working at the Space Telescope Institute, or Space Telescope Science Institute, and he calculated that there's approximately 200 billion galaxies populating the known universe. That's just what we know of. And that each of these galaxies, on average, they contain anywhere between 100 billion and upwards to 1 trillion stars. And 1 trillion is a ridiculously huge number. We kind of take it for granted, but let's put it this way. If you counted a number a second, it would take you 11 days to count to 1 million. And if you kept counting at that rate, it would take you 31 years to account to 1 billion. Something like 31 years and 46 seconds. But to count to 1 trillion, it would be 31,000 years total to count to 1 trillion at a number a second. It's a ridiculous number. And then there's galaxies out there with 1 trillion stars. I don't want to get into that. But
now it's 1 trillion stars with all the maybe possibly hundreds and whatever planets each star.
Oh, completely. Yeah, completely. And whether or not the extraterrestrial life can visit us, that's a complicated issue. But the primary reason I say that it's not as complicated as what we think is because research data, it was produced by NASA. It was published in 2012. What they did is they took data from the Spitzer telescope and they discovered that the quantum vacuum of empty space, we were talking a little bit about it, something we call the space-time continuum, it's expanding at a rate of 74 kilometers per second. I think it's something like 74.3 kilometers per second, which basically pans out to about 3 million light years every second. It's an enormous amount. So there's a lot of opportunity for planets to be generated, and a lot of opportunity for planets to be destroyed, a lot of opportunity for new galaxies to be generated in the process. But as an implication of that, what that means is that even if we were to be traveling at the speed of light, really deep space interstellar travel between remote planets is largely impossible, at least for us, simply because the rate of the universe's expansion would make the destinations move away from us faster than we'd ever be able to reach them.
Yeah.
And the only other alternative we really have for being able to reach locations that are that remote, it would require that we develop a higher paradigm of scientific understanding, and it would require that we overthrow our current concepts of the universe and allow for something along the effect of superluminal speeds, or speeds meeting and exceeding the speed of light. And otherwise, if our current models are correct, then deep space travel to alien homeworlds, however far away, it's simply not physically possible. But we can forget about really this Deep Space Nine phenomena, because we could look at the prospect of at least of local interstellar travel. Is that even possible? Sure, it is. This is where the odds kind of tilt in our favor. The NASA World Book in 2007, they published an interesting figure. And they said that there are about 400 billion stars in our galaxy, which is the Milky Way. In our sun, it's only one. And how much is 400 billion? Think about it like this. If you can imagine 10,000 stars for every grain of sand on planet Earth, that's how many stars are just in our galaxy alone.
Every grain of sand?
If you imagine 10,000 stars for every grain of sand on planet Earth, that's 20. That's approaching how many stars are in our galaxy. So, what does that mean? Well, there's research about it. It's research that comes from the University of California, and it was published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. They've got good news. They've got the Gospel of Ufology. Is that virtually 1/5 of these 20 billion suns, or 20 billion suns that might fall within a habitable range? In our galaxy, they have Earth-sized planets, and they're orbiting the local stars within a realm that astrobiologists like to refer to as habitable zones. You mentioned it before. You call them Goldilocks conditions. But we could really break that down a little bit further. The University of California, they went ahead, they managed to compute that something like 22% of these stars that they've observed at least are accompanied by Earth-sized planets, and that these Earth-sized planets are orbiting within those habitable zones you mentioned with the Goldilocks conditions. They're orbiting within those. And that basically pans out to about 8.8 billion planets, which the University of California has calculated as being positioned, at least in our galaxy, to allow the evolution of life. And there's another source. This information was taken from the Doppler and light parallax analyses. That's a form of astrophysical measurements. And they revealed something peculiar about the Milky Way, and it's that our galaxy is 13 billion years old. I'm not sure if you know how old the universe is, but that's incredibly old. The universe is 13.7 billion years old.
Actually, we just got a question in chat from ARW. He says, do you believe that what they're currently saying about the Earth being 5 billion years old, that the universe is 13 billion years old? He wants to know what your thoughts are on that. Is that ratio not pathetic? So the
question is what? He wants to know that if the Earth is 5 billion years old.
Do you believe what they're saying about it being 5 billion years old?
Everything that I've looked at says that the Earth is not 5 billion years old. I mean, the information I'm looking at puts it within a range of about 3.9 to about 4.3. So I'd have to look at some of the information that he's providing to update some of my views. If it's the case, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, I thought our sun.
But I can't really give him an informed answer on that.
I thought the sun was only 4-point-something billion years old. How could the Earth be
older than that? Sun itself, I don't know the age of the sun. Yeah. There's plenty of stuff I don't know.
There's actually another question too from Hi, and she wants to know: is the universe really infinite? Could there be an edge, and if so, could we ever possibly reach it?
I think that the universe, in all likelihood, is of an infinite scale, but what we call the known universe, it would be. I think the space-time continuum would probably be infinite, but this is my speculations. I'm developing a cosmology around this. Don't take anything what I'm saying right near as science. If you do, it's pseudoscience. This is my own personal opinion. I think that the universe is probably infinite. I think that there's pockets to which you have singularity events which detonate, and within those detonations, you have the possibility of life emerging and evolving. That tends to basically be how I approach the subject. So, but the multiverse hypothesis has been straight out falsified. Simply put, if the multiverse hypothesis is true, then it stands to reason, according to physicist Paul Davies, that at least some universes would develop computer programs that are capable of running AI-simulated universes, which would mean that it's much more likely that we exist in a simulated universe of an alien than in a multiverse. So that's a devastating criticism to the multiverse, because it means that if the multiverse is real, it's astronomically less plausible than the universe being a simulation. So I totally reject the multiverse hypothesis. In addition to that, I think it's been falsified by another experiment by a researcher named Shahryar Afshar. But that pretty much answers that.
Now, are there any current theories about what kinds of propulsions would be used to cover vast distances more than?
I'll get into that. Okay. I'll get into that. It's something called a Kane drive, but I could get into that in a split second. We're dealing with species that may potentially be thousands of years more advanced than us, and that's not altogether unimaginable because our galaxy is incredibly old. I said it was 13 billion years old. You have to remember that the universe, or the universe itself, our universe, would only be 700 million years older than our own galaxy. So what that means is that the Milky Way is extremely old. I can't emphasize that. I'm almost going to swear because I swear like a sailor, but we're freaking old. And how many more planets occupied in the habitable zones that could have died have basically passed us already? How many more stars in the same category of our sun have long since pretty much been extinguished? You know, how many extremely ancient civilizations are out there? Civilizations we can't even imagine how they are. Civilizations who've managed to outlive the collapse of their stars, and they might be roving around, you know, colonizing other worlds in their local milieu. But it's not as speculative as we think. You know, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, which was published in 1997, the Earth is pretty much about 4.5 billion years old. The Milky Way has already been. The Milky Way it's 9 billion years old at the time to which the Earth was made, or the Earth was created, or evolved, or however you choose to figure the language. When it was planetogenesis formed it, and that means that well before the Earth even existed, there were trillions upon trillions of opportunities for life to evolve. And what that means, again, it's simple, and it's simply that that given the extreme age of the Milky Way, there's no better place for life to be looking for life than in the Milky Way, than an incredibly ancient galaxy such as ourselves. We can look for super advanced races of starfarers in our own backyard. And that's precisely why Stephen Hawking said that he believed the existence of extraterrestrials was perfectly reasonable. And like I said, I agree with the guy. Discovery Channel in 2010, he said that, let me grab the quote, "The real challenge is to work out what aliens might actually look like." And I think we have the means to be able to put some figures together as to deconstruct that. But do you have any questions you want to shoot at me, guys?
Well, actually, there's another one before Jamie gets to his next one. There's a quick
Sure,
one
what's up?
from chat. And Eric wants to know, do you believe that civilizations thousands of years older are likely to be much less hostile, more peaceful in nature?
No, I don't think there's any reason to suspect that they might be more peaceful or more hostile. I think that's human prejudice about how we conceive of morality. You have to remember, they might not even have morality. Morality might just strictly, basically, look, on everything on planet Earth, we're the only species that has morality. So if we're going to speculate that they have morality, that's anthropocentric. They might not have any sort of idea of what morality is. When they say that we're going to come into contact with species that they value justice and honor and respect, we have no conception of that.
Emotional, yeah. I know what you're characteristics. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've demonstrated a little bit about why the extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis it's at least intelligible from what I consider to be a subjective perspective, let's try to move forward to the existential matrix of the investigation, because this is where we're going to really be assuming, like I said, a three-dimensional perspective, and we're going to be applying cognitive holism to the problem. And we'll start with NASA. I know a lot of people don't like NASA, but I think they're a pretty good resource method. In 2009, you guys heard of the Kepler space probe, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. NASA in 2009 launched the Kepler space probe, and they named it after the astronomer Johannes Kepler. And it's basically an observatory that falls into Earth's heliocentric orbit. And it was engineered to scan the local group of stars here in the Milky Way, and it's looking for Earth-sized planets or exoplanets that are orbiting their local stars, at least within their habitable zones, their Goldilocks conditions. Now, Bill, you're going to like this, because in January of last year, not 2016, but 2015, NASA announced that the space probe pretty much picked up about 1,000 planets, about 1,013 exoplanets, and they found that they were orbiting within the vicinity of their habitable zones. And they've counted about 440 solar systems that have these things. And throughout this year, at least, we discovered another 3,000 of them, or 3,199 other discoveries that are trending in the direction of the confirmation of Kepler.
And like I said, last week they announced one that is only 3 light years away.
That's at Proxima Centauri. Proxima Centauri is a little bit under 5 light years. It's about 4.3 light years away. But that's the thing about it is they're making all these announcements about the discovery of Earth-like worlds. One, like I said, Proxima Centauri. It's our closest interstellar neighbor, and it's been discovered, like I said, orbiting a habitable zone. It's actually Proxima b. That's the star it's orbiting, but it's under just a smidgen under 5 light years away from us. And the significance, at least for me, is obvious. Beyond this, it demonstrates that there's a rational basis for us to believe that Earth is being visited by at least one advanced race of intelligent beings. And they could come from anywhere within our galaxy, but that's not even the best part. Because in October of 2015, astronomers operating the Kepler space probe, they discovered something crazy. They discovered a star cocooned by a hurricane of megastructures. and that matches all of our known criteria for what we would only describe as a Dyson sphere. It might be a Dyson swarm or a Dyson net. The name of the star is KIC. Let me look at the serial number. Hold on. KIC 8462852. So I'm not going to say that again because that's ridiculous. But anyhow, they've made this determination by observing the patterns of light that the star emits. And the star exhibits anomalous light flickering with sort of like an eerie machine-like regularity, and it's consistent, like I said, with these colossal megastructures passing between the star and the point that the Kepler observer is looking from. And it's these dips in the light spectrum that Kepler succeeded in tracking. And really they defy all of our conventional wisdom regarding what we would anticipate in terms of exoplanets being eclipsed or anything else like that. But we have to bear in mind that the researchers didn't just leap at this conclusion. The astronomers themselves over at NASA, they went through extraordinary lengths to separate some of the wheat from the chaff on the issue. And they did it by abductively eliminating all known natural hypotheses that could account for the behavior. And the result, at least as of today, returns to the same hypothesis. We're observing either an incomplete Dyson sphere or one of its subtypes, which might be a Dyson ring or a Dyson net or even a Dyson swarm. And as a matter of fact, Penn State, they published a paper at arxiv.org. It's arxiv.org. I like to go to that place. They're somehow connected to Cornell University. But that paper suggests that what we're looking at might actually be the real thing. And just so that you know that I'm not joking about it, if anybody wants to go check it out, the name of the study is the G-Search for Extraterrestrial Civilizations with Large Energy Supplies for the Signatures and Information Content of Transiting Megastructures. That's a mouthful, and I'm not saying that again.
If you can, Mike, put that link to our Sky. Oh, no, you can't. That's right, because you're on the phone.
I already got it.
Yeah, I'm on the phone. I'm going to have to go to your website.
Chat, Bill.
Send me the link on Facebook, so eventually.
Yeah, I will.
I'll put the main site in the chat room.
Oh,
so.
good. Jamie's
you guys will be happy with that. But again, bear in mind that the light that the researchers are observing is 1,400 light years away from this Dyson, whatever the hell it is. And that means that the light we're observing now is about as old as Islam. And that's how long these events were taking place. That's how far away these events are and how long ago they were. And here's what this means for us. It's that the star itself, if what we're observing is really a Dyson sphere, could now be entirely occulted by the intervening Dyson sphere. And the prospect of our observing a genuine Dyson sphere, it raises several insights, and it's namely that the completion of a structure would only be possible for a race that with the capacity to outstrip planetary resources of its local star system, because the construction of a Dyson sphere would inevitably demand more matter than what really exists in a solid system. We'd have to smash planets completely and turn all their metals into it's ridiculous levels of technology we're talking about. And the reason why this is relevant to our discussion, at least, is pretty simple. Progress in the construction of a Dyson sphere can only be made by a Type 2 civilization, and that civilization would have to have the capacity to travel to other star systems.
Right.
So the very existence of a Dyson sphere, which we're probably looking at, also provides us with a motivation that we can use to explain why such beings would be interested in starfaring. They probably outstripped all the viable resources of their own star system. They're searching beyond the boundaries of their star system to get some extra materials that they could use to finish building their project. But again, it's too soon to speculate on motives. They're aliens, so they're alien by definition. We might not know for certain.
I got a question for you. I don't even mean to interrupt. I don't want to be rude and interrupt you, but
yeah, no, go ahead.
There's a lot of ufologists, and there's a lot of theories that extraterrestrials, a certain species, a civilization, has come here to mine gold in particular.
There's no need to postulate that. You're a lot more likely to get gold out of meteorites than you are to get.
That's what I was going to say. Isn't gold? It's found throughout the solar system.
Look. If they're looking for resources, they don't have to come here. They could go anywhere else that they want. They could land on Pluto and mine the hell out of that thing without having to be detected by us. There's no reason to speculate that.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask you that.
Sure, but like I said, we're looking at Dyson spheres. Where was I?
Well, they're going out to
that's right.
For resources.
Yeah. So here's the thing: they're traveling around. The fact that they could travel, it would beg the question of really the significance of this type of conjecture, because really, what does the possibility of us having discovered a Dyson sphere mean to us? And what does it have to do with the discussion that we're having now? Basically, in my opinion, I don't believe that the significance can be understated. The point here isn't that a Dyson sphere was discovered. The point here is to illustrate the fact that we as a species have crossed a pivotal point in our technological evolution where not only do we have a fully coherent and intelligible theory for expounding on this, but it might be even possible for extraterrestrial beings to be engaging in at least some sense of interstellar travel with us. And we could actually develop an actual swear-to-God hypothesis, at least from a scientific level, that resorts to applying these principles to us to help us explain any of the sort of atmospheric anomalies that we might be observing. Make sense?
Yes.
Good.
Absolutely.
So, in a nutshell, what we've discovered isn't just that the ET hypothesis of alien visitation, we know it's intellectually coherent now. We've also shown that it's undeniably rational in the sense that it's capable of accounting of a very specific class of observable experiences. So that qualifies it up to this point as a logical conjecture as well as a rational one. So in short, the ET visitation hypothesis, like I said, it's rational, it's intelligible, but we need to anchor it in some sort of bedrock of experience. So another question this calls to mind, and it's basically, can the hypothesis of ET visitation be experientially qualified as a class of objectively extant phenomena? Can it? Can we anchor it in real observations? And to answer this question, it requires that, again, we reduce the scope of our perspective from a three-dimensional vantage of holism to a more reductive model of cognition by assuming what I call an objective perspective on the chaotic abstract of the issue. So let's go back in time for a second. Let's go back to 2014 because that's really when I began really researching the hell out of this stuff. And I was in conversation with Stanton Friedman. You guys know who he is. He's for listeners who don't know who he is, the guy's pretty much regarded as the Einstein of ufology. He's a nuclear physicist. The guy's brilliant. And Friedman explained to me that there's at least several classes of science that apply to ufology, at least, or at least one that does apply to ufology. And he said that the hardest brands of science, they work by setting up experiments where the variables are easily controlled, or they've even eliminated those variables so that measurements can be taken. And then when the data is abstracted, the results are sent to scientific journals for publication. They peer review the hell out of these things, and they criticize the experiments. And others who are interested in testing these claims or putting the claims to the crucible of science, they themselves will set up experiments following the described protocols to test if it's possible to get the same results. And physics and chemistry, along with other different types of sciences, tend to basically fall into that category. But Stan told me that there's another kind of science, and it's based on carefully observing situations where it's not only possible to control, it's not possible to control the variables, but that some of the variables in the experiment are at least orderly and predictable. All right, for example, meteorology. Meteorology is a classic example of this kind of science. And another kind of science would focus on probing the nature of certain events that are beyond humanity's ability to either predict or control. But when they do occur, we can at least be ready to take some measurements. And so we have fields like seismology or anything else to which events spontaneously happen, and we can be there to measure them. Right. That's the type of natural event that tends to occur within that type of science. But Friedman pretty much explained to me that another type of science is the class that involves really gathering intelligence from reliable sources, and we try to reconstruct events from that intelligence so we can learn what happened, and we can learn about where it happened or why and how it happened. For example, forensic science or crime scene investigation. And when it comes to these kinds of things, it's really impossible to know when they're going to happen. But at the very least, we know that they're going to happen. And when they do happen, we have to gather as much intelligence as possible. Usually it's lots and lots of eyewitness testimony, from preferably eyewitnesses. And we use those testimonies to reconstruct the events into something we could learn from. And this is the kind of science ufology falls into. So this is the kind of objective evidence we're going to be looking at. We're going to be consulting it. And the question is, what kind of testimony do we use? So historians are interested in reconstructing events. They like to try to figure out what was the most probable event that occurred within an established past, and they use a protocol for rejecting testimony if it doesn't satisfy certain types of criteria. So for testimony to be considered credible, historians want the testimony to at least trace back to the original event itself. In other words, historians want eyewitnesses.
Yeah, but before you go on,
what's that?
You touched earlier about the different types of civilizations. Now,
sure.
If we're looking at the technology of these type of civilizations, and we're trying to discern exactly through witness testimony, I mean, there are a lot of credible witness testimony out there of individuals with backgrounds in the military, government, etc. So
Sure.
if is by using again, and I look back at time how in the religious text there's instances where maybe some type of sighting that they try to use their own time period to describe what they're seeing. Isn't it possible that some of the witnesses that are seeing this stuff today is using the same kind of philosophy, the using the environment around them, what their understanding is to describe what they're seeing, but it could be examples of the
well, let me see if I understand what you're saying. It sounds like to me what you're asking me is whether or not you have eyewitnesses throughout history. They're making observations of anomalous phenomena, and they were resorting to the means, or at least the ideas that they're aware of, to function as a type of grammar or vernacular to explain these sightings. Is that what you're asking?
Right. And again, based on the technology that these type 2 or type 1, or forget about 3, civilizations make exhibit. Their technology. So they're
going to describe them in. Look, there's something called the Wilbur-Combs lattice. The Wilbur-Combs lattice pretty much explains this, that people tend to experience anomalous events or mystical experiences or whatever, and they always describe them from their own level of experience. If you guys want to take a gander at what the Wilbur-Combs lattice is, that's just, you can look it up. Ken Wilber provides a fantastic explication as to how it's applied. But in this particular instance, I think that it might be useful to at least make a correlate it with ufology, because it's for experience. So yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly, they're going to use the memes that are similar to themselves to try to describe these technologies, and they're going to end up probably mythologizing a lot of what they look at.
All right. Well, we have to take our last break real quick, about 2 minutes, guys, and then we'll be back. So sit tight. You're listening to the Jamie Havican Show with our guest, M.A. Carrano. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
Like me, you're probably sick of waking up at night, constant interruptions during the day, and even spoiled romance. Well, Americans across the country are using a product called Prostate Revive, and they say it really works. Prostate Revive is an all-natural formula created by renowned medical doctor David Brownstein. Dr. Brownstein's Prostate Revive is the only supplement formulated to target the 2 main prostate problems. The results have just been amazing, and you can even read online the testimonials of many others who are shocked by the success of Prostate Revive. So don't take my word for it. Just give Prostate Revive a free test drive. That's right, they'll send you a risk-free 30-day trial supply. Just pay a small shipping charge and judge the results like thousands of others. Call today, 800-659-7384. That's 800-659-7384. Or go online to prostaterevive.com. That's prostaterevive.com. Or call 800-659-7384.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio, or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida.
All right, welcome back to the Jamie Havican Show. I'm here with my co-host Bill Forte, and we are wrapping it up with our guest, M.A. Carrano, continuing our discussion. So why don't you pick it up, Mike? Continue
Sure.
what we were talking about.
So we just walked away from the conversation just before the break. We were talking a little bit about what types of evidence historians expect of their eyewitness testimonies in order to be able to reconstruct an event. And, all right, so what we want is we want lots of independent sources. We didn't get a chance to mention this, but if 10 people attest to the same story, but they all got their information from the same person, that doesn't really count as 10 separate sources, because what they really have is one source that was replicated in 10 people. Right. It's also important that for historians at least, that the stories be consistent with each other. But they don't want to. They don't want to have the people know one another. The stories have to be consistent without them having an opportunity to corroborate together to get their facts straight. And they also want testimony to be dissimilar enough from at least popular accounts in certain pivotal ways that reflect details about the event, so that the event is personalized in a sense, and they could actually cross-examine eyewitnesses in order to assess the validity of these testimonies. That also builds the strength and the credibility of eyewitness testimony. And last but not least, it also helps if the eyewitnesses that are present are at least experts in the field of what they're reporting on. Namely, because lay people tend to make interpretive mistakes that experts don't. So, it helps for eyewitnesses to be able to back up their stories with hard evidence. Maybe they might be experts. They have photographic material or videos or anything else that can substantiate their claims. That helps a lot. And when all these criteria are met for eyewitness testimony, then it's safe to say that we could have it would be unreasonable to distrust the credibility of the testimony at that point. Especially when this is the exact paradigm that we use, at least forensically, and historians use it too for gathering and reconstructing historical events. It works for Alexander the Great or George Washington crossing the Delaware River or the Revolutionary War. These are the same methods that we use for reconstructing historical events. It's the same type of science that ufologists use for reconstructing historical events in the field of ufology. And in fact, testimony of this quality, at least, it's got a legal name. It's called beyond all reasonable doubt. And in some states, the significance of testimony of this caliber, it's regarded as powerful enough to justify a death sentence or at least life in prison. So we know this, it's a reliable form of investigation. Now, for our investigation, the only evidence we're going to be observing is really eyewitness reports that satisfy all of the above-mentioned criteria. In this way, it hardens the evidence into something that is really equivalent to a legal case that even a consensus of skeptics they can agree to. So let's look at article number 1. We could take the case of the Stevensville Lights. On January 8th, 2008, that's what the notes say, in Stevensville, Texas, you had approximately 40 residents. They reported seeing a rather gigantic UFO. It was hovering in the night sky, and it was just a little bit before it just bolted off into the upper atmosphere. And it pulled maneuvers that really conventional aircraft aren't capable of. And much of the eyewitness testimonies developed independent of one another, and yet they were contemporaneous with one another. The reports were similar enough at least to be able to corroborate one another's accounts without having to conspire or collude together. And there were enough dissimilarities in their accounts so that the stories were at least personalized, and they could use them for cross-examination of witnesses to investigate their credibility. And several of the witnesses who were there, they were also expert observers, one of which was an amateur civilian pilot. Another was a police officer. Police officers have to be experts in making observations because their testimony has to be useful in a court of law. And virtually all of the witnesses reported that the UFO displayed certain types of flight capabilities that are not possible with conventional aircraft. And several eyewitnesses were able to even substantiate the claims themselves they provided real footage of the event. And then after that, we could look at something like the Chicago O'Hare UFO incident. Now, on the dusk of November 7th, back in 2006, that's when it took place. And it took place at the Chicago O'Hare International Airport. And the object was witnessed by 12 individuals, all of them independent of one another, and all of them were airport employees. It included one expert witness. It was a professional pilot, all of which reported a metallic disc-shaped craft. It was levitating over the C-12 gate, and it basically levitated in a manner that defied the limitations, again, of really known conventional aircraft. It is reported that one of the pilots may have succeeded at least in photographing the object, but that photograph hasn't turned up. But still, radar towers couldn't pick it up, and that really alarmed the airport because a failure of that magnitude, it embarrassed the airport enough to demand at least a government investigation into the incident. But the government itself declined to really investigate the matter further. They didn't really take him seriously. Then there's the instance of the New Jersey Turnpike UFO that took place in 2001. And on the night of July 14th, back in 2001, there were multiple independent eyewitnesses on the Jersey Turnpike, one of which included an off-duty police officer. And they all simultaneously reported a party of yellow lights that was sort of flying around in formation. It was close to the New York City line. And the sightings, in fact, continued into the early morning, and they continued up to the following day, and they were corroborated by a lot of eyewitness testimony, one of which included a Carteret police lieutenant. And he was basically, it was when he was taking his 19-year-old daughter to the station and I think she was a witness too, but they reported that her and her friends had seen the lights as well. And the name of the lieutenant, his name was Dan Tarrant, he told ABC News that he himself saw the event and that it was 16 orange lights that he saw. They were flying in the V formation, and they had other lights that were accompanying them sort of outside of formation. But then there's another mass sighting. You guys have probably heard of the Belgian wave. It was reported somewhere around November of 89, and it occurred from November of 89 to about April of 1990. And it was during that time that about 13,000 people reported seeing waves of really triangular UFOs. They were just careening through the skies, and they were performing all different types of exotic aerial maneuvers that are really impossible, like I said, for conventional aircraft to duplicate. And the crafts themselves, they were widely photographed, and they were submitted as evidence everywhere. And they're part of the public record now. The UFO sightings, they peaked on the nights of March 30th and 31st, and that's when the military, the Belgian military had successfully tracked the crafts on radar. They scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept them, but the UFOs basically outcut them and outmaneuvered them. And after the Belgian wave, there's also another incident. It's regarded as the most significant UFO sighting of all time. Bill, this is what I promised you. We're at it. It's called the Hudson Valley sighting.
Hey, here we go.
We got it, yes. Here's what we got. The incident took place in December of 81. This is what my mother saw. Now, shortly before the new year, it was witnessed by thousands of people all throughout the Hudson Valley area, and it went from New York and into Connecticut. It went all over the place. And eyewitnesses reported that the craft wasn't just even large or gigantic, but it was colossal. My mother said that when she saw it, it was gigantic. My teacher said the same damn thing too. She said it was as big, if not bigger, than a city, like a city block just coasting through the air. They both say it was utterly gigantic. But some reports say that the craft was at least as large as a small town. Other reports, they claim that the craft was disc-shaped, while others testified to it being wedge-shaped. There's not a consensus on that, but they've detected it on radar. But almost all agree that the lights were clearly visible, and that they moved along the perimeter of the craft. And since the time of the event, there's been an enormous amount of photographic evidence that has surfaced to corroborate what the eyewitnesses were reporting. And it was sort of manta ray. It was sort of manta ray-shaped, and it was lined with a prism of what looked like fluctuating lights. Now, in time, a book detailing the most qualified evidence that we know of surrounding the event, it was published under the title of Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO sighting. So if you want to check that out, you can.
Do you know the author offhand?
It's been a while since I looked at it. I have to go look at it. I can't remember. I'm good at some stuff. I suck at other things. But
so it's Night Siege. Can you repeat that title, please?
Yeah, it's called Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO sightings.
Oh, gotta get it. Okay, thank you for that.
Sure. Now, based on my research, I've just presented, at least in what my opinion constitutes as the 5 highest quality pieces of eyewitness testimony that's available to substantiate the claim that A, not only is UFO visitation possible, but B, it's also plausible, and that our planet is being frequented at least by aircraft of extraterrestrial origins. And in each scenario that I've recounted, the scenarios are attested to by at least a dozen and upwards to 1,000 eyewitnesses. All the testimony provided are contemporaneous to the events themselves. It all includes witnesses making similar reports independent of one another. All these reports are largely coherent with one another, and yet they're personal enough in their details that there's dissimilarities that can be cross-examined against each other. And what's also important is that if we include some expert witness testimony into the incidents, we really have a high credibility level of objective evidence to substantiate the argument that UFOs are visiting us. But most importantly, each account provided isn't simply testimony, because in all cases there's been photographic or video evidence or official records to substantiate, at least through official documentation, the claims that we're looking at. So, in other words, when it comes to evidence that's this widely popularized, or at least available for lay people to investigate the claims, this is really as good as it gets. And up until this point, I've been successful in demonstrating the UFO hypothesis to at least be intelligible from a subjective perspective. But I want to also go ahead and move past the rationality of it or the empirical quality of it so that we can begin to investigate whether or not the science of it is possible for us to independently verify as real. Is that cool?
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
Do we have some time for it?
We got about 5 minutes if we can.
Okay, so all right. So if we only have 5 minutes, I'm going to basically have to go ahead and have to bang this out. So the method that we're talking about basically breaks the phenomena up between flaps and waves. Now, in this case, a flurry of UFOs that's localized in a very specific pattern versus another that's not. That's what we're going to be looking at. So when flaps are regionalized, so that vast swaths of people are living in different places, they observe similar events and they're protracted over a period of time within a cyclical fashion, then what they're looking at is waves of UFOs. Flaps are just basically like sightings of UFOs that occur, sporadically. Mm-hmm. And from the available data that we have, ufologists were able to devise at least a method that makes it possible to measure how frequent UFO observations occur in order to evaluate these types of things. You know what? If we're running out of time, I could always come back and I could present this data later. Would that be better?
Well, maybe you want to do that when you come back in November.
Yeah, let's try that out, because I don't want to go ahead and crash through this, because some of the science that I have right here, it's worth actually allowing it to it's worth allowing people to look into it. But if people want to know what the research is, they have to look into a guy by the name of Michel, and he has a theory called orthogonally. And it was developed in 1958. That's where I'm taking this information. And it's the first real attempt to measure the predictability of UFO phenomena by studying a wave of UFO activity that occurred throughout France, and it took place in 1954. And that wing of science actually demonstrates that the UFO phenomena can be predicted. It can be independently verified. So to summarize everything that we have in a nutshell, so we can get to answering questions, I showed that the UFO visitation hypothesis, at least from an extraterrestrial perspective, is illogical. It's logical. I showed that it explains a wide variety of anomalous observations in our world around us through a contextual perspective, and it shows that it's rational, has rational faculty or rational applicability to our world. I showed that through the 5 different demonstrations or examples I've given, we're able to empirically substantiate it. And last but not least, through orthogonally, we have the ability to verify the UFO phenomena as being real. So, look, those 4 different branches of knowledge from a metanoetic perspective give you as rock solid of knowledge as that you possibly can towards substantiating and saying something is really happening. In a nutshell, to sum it all up, I've just provided you with the best information that's out there for substantiating whether or not extraterrestrial visitation is happening. Conclusively, the answer is yes, it's happening. It's happening.
Now, to give our listeners a little insight about your next appearance on the show in November, what do you plan on discussing on the next show? Is there anything?
Oh, wouldn't you like to know? Okay, wouldn't you like to know? I could do that. Okay. For the next show, I'm going to be investigating the UFO abduction phenomena.
Cool.
So for those of you who missed my first appearance, I discussed a little bit about the Fermi paradox to answer the question of whether or not we were alone in the universe. This show, I'm building off of what came prior to that by showing that where I answered no, we're not alone in the universe from last show, I'm answering the question in this show, are we being visited? The answer is yes. The next show is going to basically be, what are they doing here? I'm going to be investigating that from a metanoetic perspective. So everything builds off one another. So if somebody wants to go ahead and they want to follow the continuum of events as I'm presenting them, they can. So that hopefully by maybe show 6 or 7, by the time I'm done, they'll be fully up to date. They'll know what I know on the subject, and they'll be able to argue from it coherently.
And he'll be back on November 13th. So Jamie and I confirmed that date.
So is that a Friday?
It's a Sunday night, as always.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
And it will be November 13th.
Good stuff.
And by the way, the book was written by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Night Siege, and it's available on Amazon.
How did I not know that? How did I not know that? Because Hynek's a legend. How did I not know that?
I just ordered it too, Jamie.
Good.
I just got it.
Yeah, no, Night Siege. Yeah, look it up. I saw it when I was at the Miller Memorial Library, which is not far where I live. It's just in the outskirts of Yale, and that's where I saw it. I started basically reading about it and putting information together from it.
Well, I think
still going on. I'm sorry, Jamie. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think we all learned a lot tonight with tonight's information and show, and we definitely look forward to the future ones. Really, the only question in the chat was the one about Pluto we asked earlier, which you can pop in chat and answer, or you can answer now if you'd like to.
Yeah, give me a shot. I was just trying to. What was the question?
They wanted to know why does Saturn have rings? Could any planet evolve rings? Could anything happen to Saturn to lose its rings? And also, is it off tilt with the rest of the planets in its axis?
Okay. The phenomenon that we know that has evolved with the process of planetogenesis is something called accretion disk theory. The sun itself goes ahead. It forms from a molten batch of hot plasma, which is whirling in a vortex. The center of it condenses into a nucleus, and it pulls all the surrounding plasma into itself. In certain places within the plasma, gravity causes clumps to basically overpower other parts, and they form orbs, which themselves become accretion disks. And then they go ahead, they condense into planets. That's planetogenesis. Now, in the case of Saturn, it was formed through an accretion process. But what happened is that when the disk itself all pulled into itself, there were moons that were on the perimeter of it. Many of these moons collided with one another. They pulverized one another, and the rings that we're looking at is really the remnants of different moons that had existed one time, but they've since collided with each other, and the detritus is strewn outward and about in the form of a ring. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Jupiter. They could also come from different types of. It could also be that that large planets like that take a lot longer to accrete, but we don't know. But the best explanation that we have right now is accretion disk theory for I can never say that friggin' word. Planetogenesis. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. All right. Well, we thank you for your appearance tonight, and we look forward to the future one. Bill and I are going to wrap up, but anything you'd like to plug, any information, any sites, anything people should research?
Yeah, lift weights, do MMA, and fight for stuff. That's it. Lift weights, do MMA, and don't take shits from anybody.
Gotcha.
That's it. I'm not going to plug anything that's stupid.
All right. Well, we look forward to the future appearance, and have a good night. And
take care, guys.
We will all consume the information that we've learned.
Ciao.
Have a good one.
Good night.
All right. Well, hope everybody absorbed the information. It wasn't that. I'll tell you, tonight was a lot easier to follow than the first show.
Yes,
at least for myself.
It's going to make for a great replay too, because it's.
I mean, tonight I was ready. Yeah, I was ready for to keep up and to follow along. The first show, I'm bringing on a guy I met on Facebook who wants to come on and talk about some theories, and we were blown away. But yes. I think the series of shows is a great idea, and the way it's headed is definitely evolving correctly. So.
You know what, too, Jamie? It would be really interesting in the future when all of these interviews are done to make one file, all of it compiled, and make because I think that would be really informative and interesting for someone that would listen.
You got a hell of a video to make then.
Oh, it would be like 6-7 hours long, but it would really make for a great watch.
Yeah,
and add some photos and do the things that we do, and I think that would be quite informative for people to go and tune in, and maybe we'll do that on our YouTube pages in the future.
Yeah. Well, I know next week we're off. I'm having a minor surgery done on my back, and
good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks. I've had it done before, so it's no big deal. I don't even get put to sleep. He says it's amazing that I can tolerate the pain. Nobody else has ever not gone under anesthesia. So,
well, you've been tolerating the pain when you're producing, doing the show. I mean, people don't realize that while you're sitting there, you're dealing with a lot of pain there.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I don't talk about too much, but yeah, there's a lot of pain. That's 3 hours is pretty much the toll about the max I can take. And some nights, like Friday nights where we have 3 hours, I'll actually put the monitors on and sit in a recliner, which is a few feet away, and listen to the show. If there's an issue, I get up. It's only a couple seconds away.
Someone was speaking of this earlier. Yesterday was, or I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, the Experiencers Speak.
Yeah, conference. Starboard Sport was supposed to go live last night from there, but they did not have. They had internet connection, which was wireless, but the connection was really slow and would not have made for a good show. So they decided to run a replay. I'm sure Starborn will be talking about it next Saturday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, and I'm sure Richard Dolan will be talking about it as well. I know the last Experiencer Speak, they had some strange guests show up.
Yep.
So we'll see what happened for this one. Yeah.
And then we have Alan Pacheco is going to come back for his final appearance and an interview with us on September 11th. So that's when Jamie and I will be coming back. So we're going to enjoy the holiday